why don't we begin? And we're going to start with Mason Lohrei.
All right, so Mason Lohrei, second full season in the National Hockey League. He got a B minus. He got a B minus.
Okay.
So some good things. Obviously, when you talk about Mason Lohrei, you talk about him as an offensive defenseman. And he led the Bruins D-men in assists and points. 5 goals, 28 assists. Averaged 19 minutes and 32 seconds of ice time per game. Saw his role increase, elevated role once Hampus Lindholm went down, then Charlie McAvoy went down, so they were dealing with a lot of injuries on the blue line, and so he was thrown right into the fire, played 77 games after playing 52, I believe, last year, and so got a lot of great experience. On the other side, he was a minus 43. And I know plus minus isn't the end-all be-all when it comes to evaluating a player, but a minus 43 does stand out, and it was the worst rating in the National Hockey League this year. And so one of the things that Mason Lohrei, admittedly, and his coaching staff say he needs to work on is the defensive part of his game. And I think that when you talk about defensemen in the National Hockey League, and you talk to anybody who knows the game like the back of their hand, right? Like our great analysts at Nesson, it takes a while for D-men to sort of find their game at this level. And so usually it's year 6, year 7 along those lines where you sort of reach that point where you're like, all right, like this is your prime. Forwards, it's a little bit quicker. But in terms of Mason Lohrei, after now 2 seasons in the National Hockey League, there was some progression, but there is plenty of room for improvement. So the grade is a B minus.
Okay, yeah, no, I would say I would agree. Like I said, I missed a lot of the season, but in watching and understanding the progression of young players, and talking to Andy Brickley always talks about how the defensive part of the game, and depending on like what your style is, are you a true stay-at-home defenseman? And we know the league is changing and blah, blah, blah. But that kind of, there's another blah, blah, blah. I like to throw those in. That comes a little later. And he and I had talked about, Brick and I think on the broadcast with Judd as well, about the balance of stifling the creativity of a young player that takes risks, that jumps in on the play, that drives to the net, that makes fancy moves, which is what you want to see. Of course, as long as it's defensively responsible, but that comes with time and experience. And so there is this fine line of like, hey, letting a player just do that, find his creativity, find his swag. And, the more you do that and the more it works out, the more confidence you build. If you do that and it doesn't work out 3 or 4 times, and then you have your coaching staff being like, don't do that again or change this up, that can really, stifle someone in the middle of their growth. And maybe they're afraid to do certain things, which we've seen actually with players in the organization, not just defensemen, but forwards too. And, if you even want to talk about the shot first mentality that some players need to have, that doesn't necessarily translate. It's more about what I'm talking about, like confidence with the puck and confidence to try risky and creative things. And so that is kind of the discussion, like I was asking Brick about when that happens. And I think next season is a year when you're going to want to see more growth defensively, where he's spent some time now being able to understand the NHL and, get that confidence and that swag with his, like I said, offensive skills. But now the balance is there, and the experience is there, not fully, but there. The familiarity with the coaching staff, they know him, he knows them, and it's easier to kind of maybe coach a young player like that, where he's not, being scared to take those chances. So we will see how that develops into next season. But even though the plus minus, or even so, like you said, it's a bit of a controversial stat, even though defensively there's room for improvement, I'm excited for what we have in Mason Lohrei.
Yeah, no question about that. I mean, a young, talented player, and, hopefully, and again, you mentioned the coaching staff. Well, not sure what that's going to look like yet too, right? So Mason Lohrei's first year, he had Jim Montgomery in part of his second year, and then Joe Sacco taking over the reins, albeit the same assistant coaching staff. You don't know, what's going to happen in that department either. So, for a young player, having some change early on in his career too to have to adapt to as well.
All right, let's talk about one of the newcomers that was a big offseason signing, Nikita Zadorov. Curious about your take, because I feel like there was a up and down, or like the trajectory went a certain way. What's your take on Zadorov's season?
All right, so the overall grade, first off, is a B.
Okay.
Got off to, obviously, you mentioned it, signed the deal in the offseason. One of two big pieces that the Bruins brought in the offseason, along with Elias Lindholm. Oddly enough, those two following each other everywhere, right? They were both in Calgary, then both got traded to Vancouver at separate times, and then both end up signing with the Bruins. And so those two were the marquee signings in the offseason. We talked about Lindholm getting off to a slow start with the Bruins, learned about the back injury, all of that stuff, ended up finishing pretty strong. Well, Nikita Zadorov got off to a slow start as well. A tough start, obviously, with the penalties that he was taking early on. Trying to adjust to the Bruins system defensively, all of these different things that were a factor early on in his performance. But we talked about the injuries on the blue line and Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm. Well, Nikita Zadorov certainly stepped up. His play really picked up towards the second half of the year, ended up with 4 goals and 18 assists, a plus 22. Which, again, for a player who had a minus rating for, the first part of the year, and for a player who's on a team that finished in last place in the Atlantic Division, that's pretty remarkable that he ended up with a plus 22, and he led the Bruins in time on ice. So I would go with a B overall. I think, again, listening to him at the end of the locker clean-out day, whatever you want to call it, he admitted that he didn't get off to the best start, and so I think, like Elias Lindholm, you hope next season those two come in, and now a year under their belt are impactful right out of the gate.
Adam, what about? I came in. I was like shadowing for a couple of days in March, and then I came in March 15th. I forget which game this was, but it was at the beginning of my return to NESN. There were a couple of games, I think, back to back that like physically, fought. Also defended Jeremy Swayman in the crease. Like it was like had this really big presence. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe he wasn't doing that at the beginning of the season. I think the Bruins kind of brought him in for that too, just to be more of like that physical presence, intimidating guy. Am I wrong? Did he kind of ramp that up near the end?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably more noticeable because the other deficiencies, we'll say, in his game early on in the year, he mitigated that. So basically, I think what stood out at the beginning of the year is the fact that he was taking all these penalties. And I think that he was taking a lot less penalties as the season went on in terms of stick penalties, offensive zone penalties, things that you don't want to see happen. And so, the physical part of his game stood out because, you weren't criticizing the other part of his game, right? So, to your point, and I also think that speaks to, the leadership role that he took once the injuries on the blue line happened, once the trade deadline came and went. I think that was part of it as well. And you referenced March 15th. Well, that was a week after the trade deadline, so that makes sense.
Zadorov led the NHL from producer Brendan with 145 PIMs. So there you go. And, really quick, I just, my little 2 cents on him, Murat Husnudinov said in his broken English, and I say this with all due respect, it would be so hard to have English as your second language and then lights and cameras on you and all that. But he tried his best to kind of say how big, and no pun intended, Nikita Zadorov has been for him. He just kept saying huge, so important, so important, kind of letting him, in the room, but even on a personal level, letting him store his stuff, like you're moving, you're getting traded, you don't know where you're going to be, what your summer looks like, letting him store his stuff in his place in Boston and making sure he's just like not worried about anything personally outside of the game other than playing. And then obviously with the language barrier, making him feel included, taking him out, bringing him around the team. And you just expect, if you're the only other guy that speaks Russian on the team, for you to do that. But it was just nice to hear that he took him under his wing in a way that seemed like not just for the team, because you're expected to do that, like, okay, I'm going to help translate, or I'm going to help you understand certain things, more like became his big brother and, wants to have that role. And Nikita said he wants to kind of make sure he is seen that way with some of the future young guys. So we'll see how his leadership develops as well. All right. Andrew Peeke has spent some time with the Boston Bruins by now. How did you grade him?
B-. B-.
Okay.
I mean, he was pretty solid. Andrew Peake's not the offensive player that Mason Lohrei is, obviously, so you don't look for that part of his game in terms of how you grade him necessarily. Finished with a goal and 16 assists, was paired with a number of different players, obviously, with all the injuries and the turnover that the Bruins had over the course of the season. I would just say he's a solid stay-at-home defenseman. I think you saw some development in his game from an offensive perspective as well, in terms of puck movement and things like that. And those are things that he acknowledged that have gotten better since his arrival at Boston last year at the trade deadline. But I would give him a B-, pretty solid.
Okay. I don't have much to add to Andrew Peeke, but I like your assessment and grading.
I'll say this too about Andrew Peeke, and maybe I should change the grade to a B or a B+. He and Morgan Geekie were on the Hockey Hub this year. So, you come on the Hockey Hub, maybe it influences teachers' grade a little bit, just saying.
Okay, let's give him a B then. Let's do that.
There you go. Perfect.
Parker Wotherspoon was not on the Hockey Hub.
No. It's going to hurt him. No, I'm just kidding.
No, so that definitely hurt his grading. But what about Parker, who knows where he's going to sign this year? He becomes a UFA.
Yes.
Or is he?
Yeah. Well, I have to check whether or not that's because I know he signed the 1-year extension last year. I have to check out his contract. You can work on that while I give my analysis.
I'll check. Okay, you go.
Yeah, so I would give him a C, which is not a great grade. It's not a terrible. I went back and forth, between a B- and a C+ and a C. I ended up with a C only because I think he expected a little bit more out of him, and I know again not one of the top 4 defensemen on the Bruins. But after last year, the way he stepped up and filled a role, got the contract extension, I expected a little bit more out of him. Just 55 games this year, was a healthy scratch. A goal and 6 assists. The one thing about Parker Wotherspoon that you love about his game is the fact that he's not afraid to mix it up, stand up to anybody, and stand up for his teammates. So the C grade might be a little harsh now that I reconsider. And we talk through this. I think maybe he's more along the lines of C+, B-.
Yeah, so Parker Wotherspoon confirming that he is a UFA.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens with his career. And a young guy, 27 years old, he wants to continue it in the NHL, and we'll see if that means with the Boston Bruins or not. Last but not least, and we're purposely leaving Hampus Lindholm off of this, but not Charlie McAvoy. But last but not least, Charlie McAvoy.
Yeah, Charlie's a C.
Okay.
So obviously dealt with the terrible situation after the Four Nations face-off with the shoulder and all the time missed at the end of the year, and he talked about it at the end, saying that this is, in so many words, a season to forget. Personally and team-wise, he didn't get off to a great start either, right? And I know you can say that for a lot of guys, no question about that. He didn't get off to a great start to the year. He actually did. Well, actually, the first couple of games he did. I believe he had. I think he had 2 or 3 goals in the first couple of games of the year between Florida and Montreal. But wanted a little bit more out of Charlie, and I think he wanted more out of himself, and talked about that from an offensive perspective and on the power play, right? Because he was quarterbacking the power play. The power play, not all on him, but he's a part of that unit that just wasn't getting it done. And so From that perspective, and elements of his defensive game, I think too, he could tell you we're not up to his standard. And so, I would go with a C, but I would also I would temper that too with an incomplete, just because of the situation, the Four Nations, missing all of that time. That's not easy either.
Okay. I think you're used to me going off on tangents, but I'm going to try not to, but I do have to go off on a bit of a tangent with Charlie McAvoy over here, okay?
Okay.
This is like, I feel like the type of person I am or I'm becoming, I'm like less of a thinker, more of like a feeler. This is where the tangent comes in, okay? Intuitive, where I'm like, oh, I feel things. I don't see things. I'm like, this makes me feel a certain way. And I'm going to go based on the feelings I've had around Charlie McAvoy and how they've changed over the seasons. And what really stood out to me is the end of season presser, which, by the way, for those of you watching and don't know how it works, the Bruins do a really good job of making sure they don't bring out like really big names and players at the same time, but it's a long day. Sometimes they overlap. So you might bring out a Charlie McAvoy, Jeremy Swayman, a Hampus Lindholm at the same time. Adam and I were there. Judd was there for a bit, kind of tag teaming, getting into these scrums, getting the answers. I happened to be around Charlie McAvoy. You were getting sound somewhere else, so you weren't in that scrum, but I was right there in front of him, kind of like right beside him, and I could say it was tangible. His body language, his attitude, and his energy in a positive way. But I've never felt McAvoy be as serious and as determined in my life. And like, I haven't covered him for that long, but I'm saying the McAvoy that came out for the end of season presser was very different than the McAvoy that I have seen before. And not to say that the before was bad, it was just different. And so I'm just adding that in here, that I do feel like after the crazy trade deadline, after the way the end of the season played out, and after his injury, that he is like stupid motivated, like really motivated and really determined to take the reins of this team. And maybe it was falling apart a little bit and not let that happen. And I loved his conviction. I loved his honesty. And I'm really excited about the McAvoy that's going to come back to hockey next season, praying and hoping for him personally that his injury, he wasn't cleared to play in the World. So his injury gives him enough rest and time. And it was scary. Like, infections to that degree are very scary to have a good off season. But I feel like we are going to see a leaf turned and a brand new McAvoy next season, both on and off the ice. And I'm pumped about that. So that's my little tangent. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so, for sure. And he needs to be a big voice in the room, and he needs to be a big presence on the ice. No question about that. And so you hope that, first and foremost, he's healthy and recovers and there are no setbacks going into training camp next year. And B, he takes last year as a learning experience. And again, this roster is going to look different. The coaching staff could look completely different. So there are going to be a number of challenges right out of the gate for the Bruins as a whole, and they need leadership in the room. And Charlie McAvoy is one of those guys, one of those main guys.
Okay. I love it. Adam, guess what?
What?
We have the dinger ready to go. The breaking news dinger.
Let's hear it.
That's what I'm calling it from now on. Let's hear it. Oh, I like it. I really like it. Oh my God. It's everything and more. This is exactly what you want. Like, cheesy. There was like the layers to the music. I'm giving that an A+. What do you think?
I was thinking it would be a little different, to be honest with you. So Can we play it again? Is it possible? All right. I like that part of it. No, that was the finish, I think. Yeah. No, I actually like the ending of it better than I did the beginning of it. The beginning of it was a little, dare I say, weak. I was thinking of like a big breaking news sounder, like almost a goal horn, like the Bruins goal horn sound or something like that. But I can work with that.
We can work with it. I liked it, but yeah, maybe it starts slow, and then maybe the music of the soft is like the reporter running to the position. Like, okay, they're running, and then by the time they get to the desk, it's like
you got to put your two fingers on your ear too, as if it's coming in hot from the producer booth.
I do that, and honestly, I do that for real. Depending on what rink we're at, which it can be so loud in some rinks that I'm actually like, if it's Dale or you at the desk, I'm doing this not for effect, but because I really can't hear anything unless I like plug my ears.
I got the double. I got the double going.
I gotta get the double, man.
You need the double, dude. Yeah, especially if you're ice level.
Yeah. I have the one. I plug the other ear.
Yeah.
Okay, Adam, it's time for another promo before we move on to goaltending and players. This one about Boston has entered the chat. You guys heard about us talk about this podcast, and we do Hockey Hub here. It's all hockey, but Boston has entered the chat, is about the biggest trending news in sports and around Boston. So you guys can watch that, hosted by George Belechki, Travis Thomas, and Casey Hudson. Also available wherever you get your podcasts. Where are we? We're doing goaltenders next. Two. Two. Something just fell. Sorry.
That breaking news sounder really threw you off there.
It did. Okay.
There it is.
I'll let you lead. Where do you want to start, Jeremy or Jonas?
Well, I was going to say, I only have two options, right? Yeah. Let's go with Jeremy Swayman first. Okay. C. It's a C grade for Swayman. 22, 29 and 7, 892 save percentage. Gave up the most goals in the National Hockey League this year. Again, not all on him, but it's part of the stat line. Faced the 7th most shots as well in the NHL. Of the 52 goalies who played this year, of the 52 goalies who played at least 25 games this year, he was 45th in goals allowed above expected. So not a great year. Obviously, the contract situation in the offseason played a role. It's something that didn't get resolved until the season started, and so he didn't get any training camp in with the team, didn't get any preseason action in, and then was put into the lineup, and that's how the season started, and he got off to a slow start as a result. Now, what I will say is that that situation has now resolved itself, obviously. But the bigger thing, and the question going into the year, Sophia, was, it was always Swayman and Ullmark, right? 1 and 1A. And the big question was, how would Jeremy Swayman handle a full-time role, a number one goaltender role? And he says he felt great. He felt healthy. He was pleased about that. He was, quote, proud of his body, I think he put it, in locker room clean out day. And so, he was able to stay healthy, and he was durable. So those are good things, for Swayman moving forward. And he also said that this year was a learning experience for him too, right? Not only the volume of games, but I think just in general, because again, still a pretty young guy, we're talking about here, I think 25 years old. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the grade. And hopefully there's improvement moving forward, which I believe there will be.
I do too. Hold on, I'm still looking this up. I know it's not that big of a deal, but now that I'm on it, I'm in it. 26, turning 27 in November. But still, yeah. I mean, whatever your point.
26, right?
Not that big of a deal. For Sway, my only comments are, I think we forget as people, as fans, as reporters, everything is an adjustment when you're like in life, even if you're in a corporate job and you change positions, there's an adjustment. It's just not always as impactful as a professional athlete with all the attention on you, and that is just a hard thing to get through. And I don't want to be making excuses, but for him, and I'm sure he doesn't want to use that excuse for long and past the season, but there really is an adjustment period with that. And like you mentioned, the Linus Ullmark it was a very unique situation, not only them being really great friends, but just being both of them at the top of their game and the best goaltenders in the league, how much you can lean on each other, XYZ. So just to have that factor eliminated, and then the amount of games, as you said, as well as just the pressure of giving up a couple of goals or having bad games and then having to get right back in there. Razor talked about that all the time. Is a very different scenario. So it's kind of one of those easier said than done things, but you hope it doesn't extend until next season. And I do think this learning curve is hopefully going to be over, but I feel like it happened, and important that it did now, as opposed to having a couple good years and then you're going through it and maybe you're wondering what's wrong with me. There are things that make sense as to why Jeremy Swayman wasn't having the year that he wanted to have. And now you can move on and focus on, taking that and running with it and working with it for the next few seasons.
Yeah, turning the page, no question.
Turning the page, yes. Okay, Corpy, where did Corpy get?
He got a B-. He got a B-. So, again, big storyline last offseason, Linus Ullmark getting traded to the Senators. We talked about Mark Kastelik being part of that return and being a pleasant surprise. And I think that, the big focus at the time in terms of the Bruins' return was Joonas Korpisalo. And you look at the numbers last year in Ottawa, not great. He was the full-time guy, 55 games, near the bottom of the league in the major categories. And you looked at the salary that went along with that too and thinking, all right, well, is this really good value for Linus Ullmark? Well, Korpisalo had a decent year. He had some decent numbers. They're not going to jump off the page at you, but I would say that, in his role, he was good. And he was a solid veteran backup to Jeremy Swayman, and a guy that maybe, again, we don't know how the offseason is going to play out, if he's going to be on the roster next year. I mean, he's under contract, so there would have to be some sort of trade, but I do wonder if, maybe he gets a few more games next year, just to sort of lighten the load for Jeremy Swayman, but also because, he's a veteran, proved that, this year in Boston, that he's got plenty left in the tank.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he did say, I think I started in that scrum and left. I don't remember, but he did say he wanted more games, right?
Yeah, he did.
He wanted more games, and as most professional athletes who are competitive do. And it's funny, it's like the one position, obviously, that maybe if you're like the seventh defenseman, you're also, or a fourth liner, you're also sitting for some of the season if you're a healthy scratch. But it's a tough position to be in. You're a professional athlete, you've worked your whole way, and then you're a backup goaltender, quote unquote. So very normal for him to want more. And I wonder too what's going to happen. I do agree with you. I think it's going to be more of an even split unless one of them blows it out of the water and is like evidently on his game.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be close to an even split.
So maybe not even, but
maybe more games for Korpisalo. Yeah, for sure.